6 days after surgery, my knees hadn't improved and I could barely move at all. I had an appointment on the books to check in with my surgeon, who took one look at my swollen knees and decided to drain them. Instead of synovial fluid, he pulled 75 mils of dark, pooled deoxygenated blood out of my right knee and 30 mils from my left. 10 days later, the swelling had returned and he had to drain both knees again. I could tell by the look on the doctor's face that the pain I was in and the persistent swelling were not what he'd expected. Something was truly fucked up. While he gave me the third round of platelet-rich plasma injections, hoping that might jumpstart my healing process, he offered the first clue of what had actually happened in that operating room. The deoxygenated blood drained from my knees post-surgery was alarming. I'd gone in for a simple cleanup job on the meniscus, the padded cartilage that acts as a shock absorber between the tibia and the femur, the shin bone and the thigh bone. But when he attempted to trim the cartilage, his instrument failed. My meniscus and the articular cartilage that clung to the ends of my bones were too thick and tough. He said this was due to Wolff's Law, a phenomenon discovered by a 19th century German surgeon who found that when an increased load is placed on bones over time, those bones would become denser and much stronger. That sounds like a good thing, but in the knee, it can lead to deterioration or irregularities in the cartilage, which cause arthritis. In my case, the meniscus layer of padding between the bones wasn't thick and smooth like a rubber mat. It was gnarled and twisted like bark and rough like mortar. And the articular cartilage was just as tough. Instead of cutting easily, it was damn near bulletproof. My fucked up connective tissue literally broke the surgeon's high-dollar medical shears. Even your cartilage learned to stay hard, he joked. I didn't laugh much because these were details I should have heard in recovery instead of over 2 weeks later. That bothered me. However, I couldn't help also feeling a perverse sense of pride. There had been so many times in my life when I felt injured or sick during an intense physical evolution, but refused to quit, which forced my body to become the great compensator. I have adapted to deal with several medical conditions over the years. Some I'd inherited, others I'd acquired, to complete dozens of strenuous multi-day feats of endurance. In my doctor's befuddlement, I saw medical proof of that forced compensation. I'd put a heavy load on my bones for so long, they had grown dense as stone and transformed my cartilage into cement. That was almost impossible to cut through. But after several failed attempts, the doctor did manage to cut through it. While recognizing my body's compensation for what it was, a physiological adaptation that enabled me to continue to grind at a high level, he still used a cookie-cutter approach to the surgery. My knees were undeniably fucked up prior to the surgery, but I could still function with them. Just a few hours before being wheeled into the operating room, I had run 10 miles. Now, 2 weeks later, I limped to a stationary bike at the gym, hoping to break a sweat, and lasted 22 minutes before the pain overwhelmed me. I went from the Moab 240 to running across the state of Florida to 22 minutes on the exercise bike. I returned again to the doctor's office a full month post-surgery, and when I told him how much anguish I was in and how little mobility I had, he downplayed it and in the next breath casually informed me that during surgery, he drilled into one of my bones. At no point during the run-up to surgery had he ever mentioned that as even a remote possibility, and despite seeing me in recovery and twice since then, he had never mentioned that he had drilled 2 small holes into my left femur, which was strange because that is not a procedure a doctor is likely to forget. He said that after removing most of the cartilage in my left knee, he wanted to tap my bone marrow so it would leak out, puddle up, and create a clot that over time is thought to mimic the padding provided by an intact meniscus. He also mentioned that at some point during the surgery, he cleared the OR of anyone who was not a vital part of the process. This revelation didn't make me proud. It pissed me off. I have had several major surgeries in my life, and I never received important and unexpected details pie-mill. Surgeons are trained to explain the surgery at the earliest opportunity. But this guy wasn't playing by those rules. Starting on the day after surgery, there were several times Kish wanted to reach out and ask the surgeon to explain my level of pain and immobility, because they were way beyond the expectations he'd laid out. I felt the same way, but did my best to control my emotions and avoid hitting the panic button. On the way home from his office after learning about the holes he drilled, however, my anxiety spiked. That evening, Kish and I did some investigating, and what we read online was unsettling. From what I gathered, it seemed that he'd given me some type of microfracture surgery and never said a word about it. After several sleepless nights, I texted the doctor at around 5 in the morning and told him I needed some answers, straight up. To my surprise, he replied right away and continued to reiterate that the knees were only going to get better now that they've been cleaned up. I challenged him on the microfracture procedure, and he said a microfracture surgery has a minimum of 5 holes. He'll only drill 2, and that they should be filled in by this point. He said pretty soon I'll be back to running like I always had, and that nothing would hold me back. I had a hunch that this doctor was full of shit, but that text exchange confirmed it. I could no longer trust him. No matter how pure his motives may have been, he'd made questionable unilateral decisions, performed poorly, left me bone on motherfucking bone, and then fed me unsettling details bit by bit. There was no excuse for any of it. On March 17, I stepped onto a treadmill for the first time since surgery. I was at physical therapy and the staff didn't know it yet, but I'd already decided it was my last day. My right knee was feeling a bit better, my left was still broke dick and collapsing on the medial side. The therapists who had been monitoring my progress were affiliated with my surgeon, and despite my pain, they wanted to see me jog it out for 5 minutes. I ran for 42, not because it felt good. Every step hurt like hell, but I kept going because I knew this would be my last run for the foreseeable future, maybe forever. And considering how central running had been in my life for so long, 5 minutes didn't feel like enough of a farewell. 5 grinding miles of agony had more meaning, and when it was over, I powered down the treadmill and stepped gingerly to the floor and hobbled right out the door. As I drove home, I felt conflicted between my commitment to remaining patient enough for the great compensating machine to do its work yet again, and my fear that it really was all over this time. Despite some of the voices around me that had already accepted my demise as gospel, I didn't want to believe that. I couldn't, because ever since I decided not to be a fat ass anymore, my whole life has been wrapped around my physical being. While mindset has always been number one for me, I achieved my mindset through physical training and monumental physical challenges that provided an immediate return on investment. That is not the only way to become mentally tough, but it does happen faster when you run thousands of miles, swim long distances in cold water, or do thousands of pull-ups. When you invest that volume of pain and suffering in yourself, it will produce mental toughness. In other words, my life and my sense of self, from the time I was 24 years old until the day of surgery, were built on training and competing hard to become mentally strong. And they were taken from me in 90 minutes. Not by accident or freak injury, but by one doctor who failed to live up to his Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. I know it was unintentional, but there was major harm done. I couldn't sweat out the stress, so it was difficult for me to process all the emotion and frustration. There were times that even I wanted to surrender to self-pity. I was tired of Goggins, tired of always fighting the fight, and while I abhor excuses and excuse makers, when I checked myself in that mirror each morning and every night, I told myself the clean truth. It's over. You can't do it anymore. And I found some comfort there. I felt like a quarterback at the line of scrimmage reading the defense and clocking nothing but pass rushers with blood in their eyes. The linemen, linebackers, and defensive backs would outnumber and easily overwhelm my blockers, sprint around the edge, bull rush inside, and the pocket would collapse. Unless I averted disaster before it struck, I had to call an audible, yell out a new play at the line of scrimmage loud enough for my whole squad to hear. But as I leafed through the playbook in my mind, I couldn't find any workable solutions. It's not like this was new territory for me. I'd been facing steep odds and calling audibles all my life, but this was the biggest of them all. When your entire being is rooted in a particular way of life and it gets taken from you, what is the proper play call? As restless and frustrated as I was, I knew patience was the only play for now. Sometimes the best thing the quarterback can do is throw an incomplete pass, avoid losing any more ground, stop the clock, and regroup. While I believed my knee was as good as it was going to get, I still wanted to give it time to see if the pain would ease or my stability would improve at all, so it was not the time to tinker. As devastating as it was to go from running over 200 miles of pop until not being able to walk down a flight of stairs without my left knee collapsing, I had to avoid the temptation to evaluate my situation on the daily and weekly. Instead, I panned back and attempted to see it all with a wide-angle lens. The summer firefighting season was shot, and I wouldn't be running again anytime soon, which meant I didn't have to scramble for an immediate solution. 2021 was a wash. It was all about next summer and the following season. That reassured me because it meant that there was plenty of time left on the clock. I didn't have to score or even move the ball right away. I just had to watch and wait. I decided to wait a full 90 days from the day of the surgery to give my body time, and hopefully there was that word again, compensate, for the surgeon's poor judgment and errors. However, when those 90 days were up, nothing had changed. That all-out bliss was still coming for me, and the time for waiting was over. I needed to call a play. For the next 3 days, Kish and I parked ourselves at the kitchen table and scoured the internet. We skimmed peer-reviewed studies, medical journals, hospital websites, and physician bios and found that microfracture surgery was usually the last resort for meniscus problems. And when that didn't take, joint replacement was the logical next step. Joint replacement is a type of amputation. The edges of your shin and thigh bones are cut away to accommodate the artificial knee. I was not near ready to go there. Then on day 4, at exactly the same time, Kish and I happened upon an article featuring the work of a world-class surgeon at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City. Dr. Andreas Gamal was one of the few surgeons in the United States capable of conducting meniscus and cartilage transplants to heal knees so far gone that almost any other orthopedist would consider them candidates for joint replacement. This was the audible I'd been looking for. According to what we read, a meniscus transplant worked far better than microfracture surgery. It not only reduced pain and restored functionality and quality of life, it might even allow me to get after it to the level I was used to. That mattered to me because I still had unfinished business.